the uh, the idea of progress, progress as a species. I have some problems with this. So, in my experience growing up, the ideas I was exposed to were heavily focused around the idea that, um, say, in the previous century or so, technological progress was very, very fast, very, very rapid, and if you kind of graphed it historically, it would tail off. Like going back in time, it would tail off. So, like, as you play it forward, you get roughly an exponential growth, an exponential um, increase in progress. As a dumb kid, I just accepted this. I was like, okay, the older people that are telling me things and just dumping things into my uh, mind sponge skull filling wetness thing. Uh, yeah, they know what they're doing, right? Trust your elders. Yeah, but there's a point where the moist skull sponge says, "Hey, what? What? Why? Why?" So I don't know. I spent a lot of time learning about and thinking about, and this does not make me the most expert person in the world on this by any means. I'm not going to claim that it does, but um, uh, you know, ancient humans and things like that, and historic anthropology and historical linguistics, and there's kind of in this like looking at the details of where the we came from. Yeah, I have a fairly solid, I would say, familiarity with available scientific claims on these things. And of thinking about things on my own, right? Which is always a good idea, right? It's fine to temporarily accept someone else's explanation for something, but when you have an opportunity, you should kind of allow the pieces of the puzzle to percolate through your own mind, your own moist skull sponge, and come to your own conclusions about things. Right? Because I mean, ultimately, we're all wrong about almost everything we say anyway. So if not everything we say, so it doesn't really matter if you come to wrong conclusions about things. It's fine. We all do. That's how this works. Right? Um, no, thinking about it, um, there was kind of a point where I realized, well, hang on. Prior to basically the early Bronze Age, maybe the relatively brief Copper Age that preceded it, somewhere in that range, or um, you can maybe go back to the Neolithic, but really prior to that, there's effectively no progress, quote unquote. We're basically static. And if you really look at it at like Homo erectus is very possibly the first human to leave Africa. it certainly left Africa. Whether it was the absolute first or not, that's the question. But it left Africa, and it colonized all of Africa and Eurasia very, very quickly. They're about the height of most modern humans. They are they filled the same ecological niche as modern humans. They very early on have possessed many basic human technologies, like some degree of control over fire, um, and abilities to produce pretty fine quality tools. Um, and there's some other interesting things that occurred, like, for instance, wolves appeared after Homo erectus was in Eurasia, and later on, wolves were domesticated into dogs. So I think it's entirely possible that the presence of Homo erectus or ergaster or something, whatever you want to call them, um, sort of like it kicked off the domestication of something like a jackal or a coyote or something along those sorts of lines, which was ancestral to the wolves, and that initiated the domestication process, which yielded dogs. Often we talk about how humans domesticated wolves into dogs, but I've never really seen anybody other than myself even ponder the possibility that uh, humans had some impact on the appearance of wolves in the first place. And humans were in the right area before wolves arrived. That's entirely possible. So, anyway, so yeah, like the kind of the big picture, it looks like Homo erectus is basically the same species as us. And when you look at like the skull uh, morphology, they could talk. Their lower jaw and tongue structure, their vocal tract is virtually identical to us. The only real thing is that the nose is more pronated. So like basically the tongue has to go further to get those kinds of like this this like sounds like that. Your tongue has to work harder. And because there's more mass out there, it it requires more energy to talk, right? So if they were talking, then the basically the evolutionary forces which drew the mouth back and sort of flattened our faces are easily explainable. What those forces were is it's just basic physics, right? So you want to reduce the mass that you're having to accelerate out at a distance. You want to reduce that angular momentum, and you want to reduce the energy, the distance that your tongue has to travel to do certain things. And along with that, particularly the bone structure, that actually brings the tongue back into the throat more, because you still want to have a certain within the vocal tract. You still want to have you want to hit certain spots to in order to capture certain resonances, certain acoustic resonances. So the tongue has to come back for that to occur. So it all makes sense that we're effectively the same species, and there's really just some like over time evolutionary refinements that go along with the behaviors that are already established, sort of optimizing the established behaviors. So, like, looking at it this way, up to about the Neolithic, it appears for the most part that human society is stable. It's not that it's progressing slowly. What would it be progressing toward? What it looks more like is there's an animal that has adapted to its environment, and it's now just in a stable equilibrium for the most part with its predator and prey populations, its food sources, its water sources. Right? It's just a normal animal. And then, this is just going to be absolutely pure speculation. It previously was also speculative, but this is going to be like, So I kind of wonder if maybe one of the things that occurred um, that upset the balance, so to speak, um, might have been the sort of the invention of slavery, right? Because from at least the dawn of the Bronze Age, slavery existed. Probably before that. But in little smaller communities that are more scattered, it's not really as possible. It's not as feasible. It's, you know, once you start getting maybe a little bit larger community for whatever reason, maybe you're starting to grow crops, so you're more sedentary or whatever. I don't know. It's all speculative, and there's problems with any of these things. But really, the thing that allows cities to occur is large amounts of manpower for cheap. Slavery. And then I think, really, in a lot of regards, over the last 5,000 years, we've kind of been in just a different equilibrium of sorts. And the what we see as progress over that period um, really isn't. It's not. It's more like just how the mouth receded and it became easier to talk. I feel like the changes that have occurred over the past 5,000-6,000 years are mostly in that sort of direction, right? Um, so take for instance economics, right? The At the dawn of ancient Egypt, they they don't even have money. Ancient Egypt continued for a long time without money. They don't use money. They don't use anything like money. And at some point, you know, um, it was invented as sort of a convenience. See, and I personally, I don't actually think that it was to get rid of a barter system, where you're like, oh, these three chickens are worth one cow or whatever. I don't think it was really for that. I think what it was about long distance and long term storage of wealth. I think that's what it was fundamentally about. Because you have the Amber Road, the Silk Roads, these trade routes are completely, fully well established by the time we have our earliest written record of anything. And you also have, along these trade routes, you also see high diversity in ancient human species, which means that even at time periods of several 100,000 years ago, there was something special about like the Middle East, Georgia, that area. Like, why? Well, because it's the crossroads between these three continents. Why would that be important if you're not trading? So I think that these trade networks have existed probably on the order of 1 million years. It could be up to nearly 2 million years, because that's about where Homo erectus appears. So right around 2 million years ago. So effectively, the Silk Road could be 1.5 million years old easily. Forgot where I was going with that. Wow. All right. Yeah. So like yeah, so money basically makes this much easier to deal with, right? Like, so if I'm going to make a trade in Syria for, something, and then I'm going to take it back to uh, China, and I'm going to just trade that thing for something else that's more useful to me, like food. Wouldn't it be better to just have money? That's where I think that's where that comes from. And then you get, regulation on things and standardization, and that is all actually documented. That's documented history. Um, so I think that's what it is. It's not progress. It's just sort of optimizations of what's already happening. And you can even see this over the last, like 100 years or so, right? So, oh, we've had so much progress over the last 100 years. Have we? Have we really? I mean, honestly, if you take out the computers, today is very, very much the same as 100 years ago, 1920. 1920 to today, remove the computers. There's almost no difference. And computers, the development of computers has slowed to such a point that I'm recording this on a 10-year-old computer, and it's totally fine. It works just fine, right? The quality of my videos is shit because I allow it to be shit. I don't care enough. It's like kind of deliberately shit, right? It's like I don't like huge files, so the resolution isn't fantastic. I'm literally just in a random ass corner of my house. I'm sitting on a chair that is out of a minivan that I used to own and no longer own. I don't even own the car that this seat belonged to. But it's not even a real seat. It's a seat out of a car. Just it's trash that I'm sitting on, and just against a random wall. Like, I don't edit these things. I hit record. I start talking, and then when I'm out of talking, I hit stop, and I upload. That's it. There's no process other than that. It's old equipment, right? But honestly, the difference between like the way that I'm doing a video and say Mr. Ballin does a video is not that big. It's not that big of a difference. His videos are better, more entertaining, and yeah. But that's just because he's a better person than me, probably. Um, but yeah, no, like I really don't think that the whole like social progress or technological progress or like all of that. I don't really think that there's a good argument for that. I think that's just a populist notion to it's propaganda. I think that's fundamentally what it is. Like the most of the fighters, the fast jet fighters that the U.S. uses were designed in the 60s and 70s. Also, other nations, right? Russia does the same thing. They're using, right, and these are cutting edge. These are, right, they have cutting edge. Because at some point somebody realized, hey, if we just upgrade the avionics, physics hasn't changed, and we're not like able to go faster really anymore. So, and if you want to, just drop in a faster engine. This design from 30 years ago was fine. It was fine then. It's fine now. It's not like physics changed. Yeah, yeah, and that's what ends up happening, right? You just kind of accumulate technologies. You accumulate abilities to do things, and then you can't really progress it any further. Which is an interesting thing that you get from science peeps. You get they're like, oh, this hasn't changed in 100 years. Well, and that's why Apple and Samsung and whatever dropped headphone jacks from their phones because this is a 40-year-old technology. It's really old. We need to change it. Well, but it was refined to a point where you can't really refine it anymore. It's good. It's fine. Leave it. So we've absolutely, even with the technological thing, we're definitely slamming into a wall where it's just any change that we get at this point is just change for the sake of change. That's not progress. So it's funny to look back and be like, oh, everything was progressing up to this. No, I don't think it was. I don't think that's a reasonable way to view this. I think if you take everything into account, that's not the conclusion that you should come to. But what the hell do I know?